Welcome back to the Expanded Minds podcast. Today, I have a special guest with me, and her name is Joanna. Joanna is a visionary transformation specialist, speaker, and author of The Inside Hustle, a mystical Misfits travel adventure into the unknown, where she goes into detail on her intense experiences like being in New York when 9/11 happened, hiking the 500-mile-long Camino de Santiago trail in Spain with little preparation, spiritual quests in South America, and much, much more. What makes Joanna stand out to me is her storytelling and her in-depth knowledge on the heart mind. So that being said, welcome on.
Thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here.
Of course. So where I want to start out is you had an interesting experience with somebody when you were like 17 or 18 and you were going to like a bar or something and you saw this man who looked pretty mysterious. So I'm curious, can you go through that experience you had with that man and what he kind of told you and things like that?
Yeah. So I was going to a bar to pick up friends to go to like a dance party. And my friends had been, having a few drinks and stuff. So I was going to be the sober driver. And it was a bar like in another part of town that I never usually would go to. And even that my friends were there was sort of surprising, to be honest. And when I got there, I really noticed this man, and he didn't actually look mystical at all. He just looked like a normal guy. But for some reason, and he was sitting with another man, but for some reason, I was really just interested in, it was like his energy was calling out to me, so to speak. And I went to the bathroom and I came back, and back in these days I smoked, and I sort of pretended that I didn't have a lighter and went and asked him for one, even though I had one in my pocket. And he said to me, "I've been waiting for you to come and talk to me." And I said, "Oh, right. Why is that?" And he said, "Because I've got some messages for you." And he just proceeded to like download all of this information about me, about my soul path and journey, about what I was here to do, and that I, had this role on the planet that was, kind of needing to, help with consciousness expansion, to help in the planetary shift, like all of this stuff. And it was just like, he was just throwing it at me. And he was some kind of spiritual, like he was definitely a Reiki master and something else and something else. Like I can't even really remember because I was quite young. I was probably 17 or 18, I think 17. And it was just this moment of, like one of those moments where I felt like I'd been waiting all my life for someone to tell me all of that, because I knew it deep in myself. And it was this incredible validation and huge amounts of excitement, like I'm on a mission here. It's for real. Like, I was really, really like, and I literally, and my friends who had gone to pick up, there were a couple of guys, and they kept, there was such an in-depth thing going on. And then he started doing all this stuff on my back, like pulling all this energy out and doing all this stuff. And my friends were getting impatient because they wanted to go to the gig, and they kept coming over and interrupting and sort of looking at me sideways, being like, "What's going on here? You're with this random guy and he's doing stuff on your back." And, but but eventually they were sort of harassing me so much I had to go. And I said, "Wow, this has been amazing. Will I ever see you again?" And he said, "No, if you've got what you needed to, you will never see me again." And now I wonder if he was even a real person, or whether he was some being that like showed up. I mean, I don't know. I'm never going to know, right? So, but that was a very interesting shift. And I went to that dance gig and I danced all night, and I was so excited. I danced for hours and hours and hours, and I was just elated. This feeling of knowing that you're here for a purpose, you're here for a reason, you're this, you are more than you think you are, is basically the confirmation that it gave me. And so then I went and did the normal things, like, I went and worked in business and advertising and sort of like let that go. I almost like completely forgot about it. I was still spiritual in the background. I was very much in the spiritual closet. I'd go out in New York where I was living shortly after that, and, party and then come home and do channeled writing, and and then some weekends I'd like, you know, take off for a workshop on power animals or angels or something. And you know, I was very much in the background though, but I wasn't necessarily really thinking that I was going to be doing anything in this kind of regard, although part of me sort of like wished I could, because I was really passionate. That was one thing I was really passionate about, was this other side of life, you know, the unseen realms and all that had to offer, which seemed way more exciting to me, quite honestly, than, you know, like normal life. But now I understand, like, it's the blend that's so important. It's actually being able to traverse both at the same time in this beautiful symmetry. And when we allow ourselves to do that, then it becomes pretty interesting and exciting.
Yeah, it's like you talk about living a double life. It's interesting seeing how things merge, because sometimes when you talk about living that double life, when you try to be and have a spiritual practice, and then you're working like a job where, you know, it doesn't really seem as spiritual. It's hard to kind of integrate those things, and it's kind of like you feel like somewhat of a resistance, and you can't really, you know, open up like you really want to. Like, you know, things, but you can't really just like be open and be truly yourself in some instances, because just the amount of resistance or pushback. But with the guy though, I'm because you said you felt elated because he told you had a mission and destiny, but like, what kind of work did it do on you? That like, did it open up your energy centers as well? Like, what stuff did?
I mean, I imagine so.
Do you remember?
I mean, he definitely said he was pulling out a few, you know, like hitchhiking energies, I think, that I didn't need and that were getting in the way of stuff. So he was definitely giving my energy a bit of a tweak and clean out, but he didn't go into like necessarily a huge amount of detail as to what that was. But I was just in a full moment of open trust, you know. I just was like, okay. And I didn't really ask a ton of questions, because I was kind of, I felt like I was a little bit like deer in the headlights, you know, like, what is happening right now? Like, this is a bit crazy. And I could feel definitely things in my body. You know, I'm a real feeler. So I could absolutely feel different bits and pieces tweaking and being kind of not rearranged, but recalibrated maybe. And it was just, for me to become even more in balance, I guess, than how I showed up at the bar that day.
Yeah, what interests me too is just being in different spiritual states and learning how to like operate in them. And when you were going through 9/11, you talk about how you were like, even though everybody was like panicking around you and there's like a lot of emotional, you know, distress or whatever mixed emotions there was, like patriotism, things like that. You had this kind of, you were like in some different kind of state than everybody else. So if you can describe what that's like, could you please do that?
I mean, I just had this dawning of consciousness on a bit of a different level than what, I mean, sure, I was in the panic and the terror and the people running up Madison Avenue, because I worked on 51st in Madison, and like a sea of people running like for their lives. But for some reason, I was just in this like almost, there was calm and behind it all. And I was just so interested as to what was happening on other levels. And I had this really deep knowing that this was not how it was being portrayed in the media. It was not, you know, the blame of any one person, one character in this reality. This was a collective experience that was born of collective consciousness, and that we'd all signed up to be there in some way, shape, or form, however you were experiencing it, whether you were there or whether you were in another part of the world. And it was bringing attention to where we were at collectively, in a way, and the ability for that to even happen in the first place. So I just knew that it was all perfect. It all felt so divinely perfect in a way, and that it was meant to be, and that on the most profound level of our soul knowing, and for whatever happened to any one being during that time, that was always signed up for and orchestrated at those higher levels. You know, it was about a collective experience. And, you know, I truly believe that anything that happens in our lives is operating at that level, you know, of the true self, or of, you know, if you want to call it a soul or whatever you want to call it, but it's not the personality self. And it is very much born of that, particularly because it was such a big global event. It was, 100% related to consciousness and what's happening on the planet, and an emotional triggering as well for the landscape on a huge collective level. You know, there were so many different little pieces to it that just added up into this profound knowing that I was exactly where I was meant to be. I was holding the energy throughout that time. Like, I was doing prayers and meditations, and all sorts of stuff was happening in my body, and you know, in between the wild experiences and the physical of what was going down. So it was this real merging of the two, and ebbing and flowing between each, that I, at each stage of what was happening and going down as I traversed it. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And we kind of like, or how I mentioned earlier, like how it's kind of like when you're a closet spiritual person, like you kind of feel this resistance, like you're under here and you're suppressing it. And then it seems like when you started going on your adventures, it seemed like it was just full force. Like you just couldn't, like you just went straight into going on a spiritual path and just didn't hold back with your adventures and things like that. So what was it like to transition and start to actually seek, or like be finally open to, you know, explore the possibilities with, you know, your spiritual self?
You know, it's one of those things where I think, in the romantic view of everything, I was like, once I left corporate, you know, and I'd started following my passions and my dreams and, you know, giving that more airtime, I felt like the romantic part of me was like, oh, it's all going to work out perfectly and it's going to be really easy. Well, that's not what happened at all. It just wasn't, you know, like all of my adventures have been the comedy of errors version, you know, like I kind of, in a really klutzy way, move through this journey, which makes it comedic, and I can see the funny side of it in all respects. So, you know, it's just one of those things that, yes, more things start to happen when you open yourself up to it, when you step out of your routine and your comfort zone, for sure. But I was, you know, on a mission, and I was kind of in the energy of search, which is a loop. That means you're not going to ever be able to like be embodying the answer, because you're in this energy of search, you know? So there was little things in an energetic way that, even though I thought I was doing the right things, I realize now it was energetically holding me back from me actually coming into the realization of all that I was and what I was, you know, called to do. And it's been an interesting journey, because it's not a walk in the park at all. And just because I sort of stepped into the passion, you know, there's been really difficult times that it is, that goes along with a new level of growth and expansion in yourself and in what you are bringing out. And it's a journey for sure, you know, and there's not really an end point. It's a constant state of bringing ourselves back to this present moment, which has the ability for us to access everything we need, right? Instead of looking outside of ourselves, or instead of, you know, looking for different information, even from the past, that might make things make sense. You know, I really keep coming back to this idea that everything that has gone before has been at a different level of consciousness on the planet, and it's almost somewhat irrelevant to where we're at now. And you know, this drawing from all of these ancient teachings and wisdoms is great for general enjoyment.
Starting point.
Yeah, and a starting point for sure. But the more and more I go through this journey, the more I understand that it's not about that, and it's not about making sense of that, or even trying to make sense of what we're currently in. It's about us really dropping into those deep levels within the self, so that you can access the multidimensional information that's wanting to connect with you, to be able to show up in the true magnificence of who we are on the planet right now in these moments. And we're so attached to, you know, what's been and gone, and the masters that have gone before us, or any of that stuff. You know, there's a bit of an attachment, and that's holding us back from actually embodying the mastery that we truly are also. So yeah, it's these really finer points of the energetics of how we navigate our journey that make all the difference. And that's the difference between empowering yourself and not empowering yourself. And it's the difference between your gifts opening up and then operating kind of at a low level within your being, or you're maybe not even aware of it. Like, these are the differences. And it's all about us fine-tuning our perception, our state of being, so that we are able to literally, be connected to that heart moment to moment and allow what wants to be to come, and be really fluid in the moment with all of this. Because nobody really knows what the hell's going on here. And if they say they do, they're making it up. Like, nobody really truly knows, right? We only know what we know. And I'm a really big proponent of the direct experience, the direct information. And that not coming from any source outside, but actually coming direct. So a lot of my information will come from stuff that I pick up at sacred sites when I'm working with the land, or sacred geometric messages, or I get a ton of information in my dreams, my dream state. And I know the difference between
Same here,
like a processing dream that is not that fun, to like these prophetic dreams that give us information about the multidimensional nature that we have, or our level of understanding, or who we're interacting with on other levels, right? Which is how my whole connection to heart technology came to be, when these three light beings showed up in this dream and told me about it, and I was saying, what about this ancient meditation technique? And they were like, no. And I was like, but what about this healing modality?
I'm curious, like, what ancient meditation technique were you asking about?
I wasn't specifically. It was just in the dream. I was just like, I don't know if it was, I can't identify what it was specifically, but, it was like, I don't know if it was like it would have just been, supposedly all of these meditation techniques have kind of come from, an ancient lineage, but I remember them saying no, and that heart technology was the most relevant and effective tool on the planet right now. Heart technology is all you need. And so I woke up, Googled heart technology, got a bunch of cardiac equipment that was totally irrelevant. And, there was not really much to find. And so, I'm going beyond just this principle of the heart as, the seat of the soul, or the ability for us to be in a compassionate, loving being when we can more connected to our heart. It's well beyond that, into the multidimensional space of how we use this technology for alignment, for alchemy, to shift ourselves as a portal in timelines, visioning, creation, so many different ways. So yeah, I'm still exploring that, and the kind of the next level of that work is coming through right now, which is exciting.
That's awesome. So I'm very interested in, like, when you go deep inside of yourself and you start to discover all of these doorways inside of yourself, and things start to open up and stuff like that. So when you first started to, you could say, stabilize or open up your own heart to where you started to actually think from your heart, because I think some people will think from their mind, and it's like a very weak signal. Yeah. And sometimes people do think from their mind as well, and maybe it's a little bit stronger, and you can kind of like send out a telepathic message. And if you're very conscious, you can kind of pick up on what people are thinking and projecting out of their head. Yeah. But with a heart, like, what is it like to be in the heart and then think from it?
Yeah, it's so much more of an intuitive and illogical way of being because it's just not going to match up with what the mind wants to make sense of on the logical level of this reality, because the heart is not operating on that level of reality. The multidimensional technology of the heart is operating way outside that. It's doing everything at once. It's got that big picture view, and it's got all of the information in totality that is informing our moment to moment, right? Informed by all of our parallel realities that we may be in, wherever our energy is activating. And other universes, all of that stuff, right? So when we can really start to get into that space of the heart and how it communicates, and be more connected here, then we are receiving information that is just so much more profound and outside of the bounds of this one 3D reality that we're kind of focused into right now. It gives us the more expansive view and contains an intelligence that doesn't make sense to the logical mind at all. So we have to be in an immense state of trust. And also the information is very much a knowing. It comes as just that's what it is. There's no question, no doubt around any of that, right? It just communicates in an entirely different way. So when we can actually sink into that and allow the personality self to release the reins, and when we drop into that space more often, we are being led on our path in alignment with that energy that is wanting to direct us every moment of every day anyway. And the biggest thing that gets in the way is ourselves, because we think we know better. So it's this funny space where we're surrendering more to the highest level of our being, or the most expanded consciousness we contain every day, moment to moment. That's the massive difference between when we're in that space of the heart and when we're not.
Mm-hmm. And how have you used your heart? I mean, I know I've heard you mention how the heart's also like a compass as well, and helps direct you, and you have your own, you could say, energetic blueprint in there. So how have you used the heart to kind of guide yourself in the right direction, and find your energetic blueprint?
I mean, when we come into that state of trust and knowing, and we are back to my earlier point, when we are actually embodying a state of mastery, knowing that we already are everything, we already have it, all of those bits that we're kind of locked out of start to open up, right? Because we're bringing ourselves into the vibrational frequency of already having it all. And it takes practice, and you drop in and out of it. I'm not in it, 24/7. It drops in and out just like anybody, and sometimes we're more in it, and you can tell, because then synchronicity shows up. You get the confirmation by the energy and how it's flowing through you. And you start to just experience a new level of reality that is more than just maybe what you can see and hear with your physical senses. It's the subtle realms start to open up a little bit more. And I'm very much guided. I mean, we're all guiding ourselves in the experience of this reality. We are orchestrating on the highest levels of our being the challenges to show up. We're emitting it from our frequency. So we're orchestrating it all to come in to meet us, the good and the bad, the difficult and the easy, to allow us to get to the depth of the place we need to get to within ourselves, or come into an inspiration, or download an idea, or whatever it is that is going to bring us more in the train of the blueprint of our heart, that blueprint that we're all each carrying, totally unique to everyone, that has the GPS coordinates of what we're here to do, how we're going to do it, more of the fundamental details of the architecture of us as a being. And, because we've got this free will scenario going on, we get to choose how we're going to go about that in many different ways. There'll be different ways that it could come into fruition, but it's always going to be orchestrated on the deepest levels of our being. So we can't kind of muck it up. Whether you are aware of it or not, you're always going to be exactly where you need to be in that moment to bring you to your next moment. That brings you to your next moment. That is always going to be directing you to exactly the perfect, orchestration of energetics and frequency for you. And everyone is doing it differently, and they came here to do it completely differently as part of the balancing of the energetics of this planet at the time, and how that is then anchoring different frequencies. And some people are doing this not even aware of any spiritual path, not even aware of anything, and they're already doing it. We don't have to be aware of it necessarily for it to be happening. So it's one of those things where we are all just playing our role in the way that we are needing to show up in this planet right now. And the more that we can, just really trust and move into deep relationship with the self, the more we're going to be able to really optimize our own structure, that own blueprint within, all of the ability that we're carrying to bring it into the beautiful magnificence of what it was intended, So, and I don't think there's any, sort of right or wrong time for any of that. And it's actually perfect. And I think you may agree, if you look back on anything that's happened in your life, you now look back on it with a different perspective that shows that it was absolutely perfect at that time. Like everything that happened kind of was needed on the level of your being, right? If you can really come at it from an expanded perspective of like, oh, okay, I see how that led me to this, or I see how that totally blew up because it was a redirection, or I see how, I thought I was going off piste, but I wasn't. I was actually in complete perfect alignment, but in those moments, we're judging ourselves every moment of every day, most of the time. And that is breaking the frequency. That's not in alignment with our heart. When we're in judgment, we're playing in the mind. So really important keys to being able to, optimize this within yourself.
I don't know if you played. I don't know if you played around with this, and this is kind of something I've been trying to map out, like internally. One thing that I've been trying to do is like control my attention, and so I kind of see my attention as this like a little circle or whatever. And so obviously you can bring your attention to certain parts of your body, and I know that the power of the universe goes into one point into your attention. And so you talk about bringing your attention to the heart. When you try to navigate your internal self and you have certain distractions, such as doubts or maybe different labels that you put on reality, like, I mean, I'm curious as to like what has happened. How have you kind of navigated your internal self, and how have you dealt with, doubts that have tried to pull you out, and how have you stayed focused on what your heart's really trying to say? And if also, I think that mystical experiences come about when you start to control your attention and put it where it needs to be. So like, I'm curious as to like, one, like if when you try to control your attention, what has happened like mystically to you? And then two, like how is your ability to perceive reality expanded and deepened more and more by just focusing on your heart?
Yeah, it's a cumulative effect for starters. Like anything we're doing starts. So when you start focusing on your heart, just even bringing your attention there, you're starting to get more energy in that space. As you say, it's focalized energy, right? And so when you start to, harness that with intention, intending to tap into more of that wisdom and technology in there, understand more about it, whatever it is, then it starts to activate on different levels for you. If you are present enough to be witness to that and be in that observer mode, right? So you're not just allowing the day-to-day, routine rat race kind of vibe to take you out of, your consciousness and into unconsciously just doing what you do. So all of those things are really important. And I've really learnt like the guidance is not like often a booming kind of mystical voice that says stuff. That can happen for sure. I've been woken up in the middle of the night with spirit shaking my leg and telling me important information before. But equally, it's the really subtle information that we need to get more present, more quiet, and really deeply listen to allow it to come to fruition. So I'll give you an example. In the week, a couple of days ago, I had an appointment cancel, and I was tuning in. Okay, what am I called to do in this moment? Something else is going on in the energy, and I wanted to unlock some information, the next level of myself in a way, I guess, just to put it kind of simply. And I was like, okay, I'm called to be in nature. So I'm like, okay, where am I going to go? And then I'm sort of feeling in and I'm like tossing around ideas, sort of like, oh, is it in this direction? Is it this direction? You know, there's all these like, you know, parks that I could go to, places in nature. And I was like, no, just feeling into it. No, that one's not right. No, that one's not right. And then, oh, yeah, okay, yeah, the energy feels like drawn this way. So I go to the park. I already set my intention that I'm wanting to unlock something. And I walk on this walk that I've never done before. In the reverse of the way it says it's recommended, because I was Googling it to like find directions and what walks were around there before I went. And I did it in the opposite way. And as I was walking, I came to this bit and I felt something. And also on the drive there, whenever I'm going to have some kind of, whenever I need to pay attention, mystically, spiritually, magpies show up for me. So the magpies showed up as I was driving out to this place. And I'm like, oh, okay. So something's going on here, right? Like, and so then I go there, I start to do the walk. I'm walking in the opposite direction as recommended. And I come and I can see the tree looks like a lock. It's like almost like a key. And I had a flash vision in my mind about this unlocking and a padlock unlocking and this whole thing. And I'm like, oh, interesting. And so I come and I sit on the boardwalk at this spot, and my attention is drawn to the roots from the same tree and stones that are in the water. And the way that it's positioned just seems like an energetic code to me. And I'm like, oh, okay, cool. Okay, so I'm going to work with this code. So then I'm tuning into my heart. I'm like, okay, how am I going to work with this? This is energetic information, because all of sacred geometry and all of the coding is held in nature. So I already am aware of that's in my awareness already. And then I'm tuning in and I'm noticing what is wanting my attention on the subtle levels of my being. And so then I'm sort of like pulling this coding in through my third eye into my heart, doing all the stuff. My hands are like vibrating at a gazillion things, right? And I'm just following my own internal guidance as to what to do in that moment. I drop into a multidimensional activation. I'm in meditation. People are like walking by. I don't care. I'm sitting there in this space after bringing in these codes, feeling the activation within my physical vessel, feeling the energy moving, and not needing it to be anything, but just allowing for whatever energetic transmission is happening here, that my mind wants to know what it is. But if you just let it be, you know, open to anything, then more happens. Following the guidance. Oh, okay, I need to do this with my hands now. I need to do this. It just all comes because I've opened my channel. I'm listening, and I'm just doing what is guided. And I'm not questioning anything. You know, I mean, some people would think that would be really fruity. Like, oh, you saw a tree trunk and it had a key shape in it. And so then you took that as a signal to go to the spot. But then a whole activation unfolded. This whole energy, I could feel energy, light, and sound working with my being in that spot. And then when it came to completion, I'm like, okay, is everything done here? Yeah, okay, move on. Great. So, but then it continued, right? So then I didn't really know where I was going on this walk, by the way. I was just kind of like exploring and leaving it really free and open. And there's a small loop, but I ended up not on the small loop at all. I ended up going upstairs, and these stairs just went on and on and on. I mean, my booty was getting a workout. I was sweating. But then right at the end, I mean, it was literally climbing this mountain. I was sort of like, why am I doing this? But there was something about the body needing to sweat and do something with what had just happened. So I was like, okay, I'm just going to keep going. I'm tired, but I'll just keep going. But then when I got to sort of part of the top, then I got to the space and I tripped and I felt this big tug in my lower back where the Kundalini sits, right? And a big lightning bolt struck up through my body. And I was like, oh, yeah, okay, good. It feels good. Because my lower back has been a bit stagnant with energy. So it was all of these things were just leading to another thing, right? And if you're really just open to where you're being led, to what is wanting to open up to you, to how the subtle realms are wanting to communicate, then you can have those kind of experiences. And often when I work, you know, with groups and retreats at sacred sites that I have found myself, and I've had experiences where I followed the energy, things have opened up, you know, the elements will come in and confirm. The wind will start whipping up. Rain will come from nowhere and just descend. or, you know, there'll be many different elements that signal that there's something going on there. So when I'm channeling energy activations at site in these places, that's kind of what comes about. And I'm known to just step out of the way and trust this stuff. And then the magic starts happening, right? And it doesn't necessarily need to be all of the ways that your mind wants to think that it's going to happen or take place, or that you've heard about other people having the experience of X. Like, that really is going to get in the way of your own divine structure and how you uniquely perceive and understand energy and work with energy yourself, because it's all very different for everybody. So if you can just drop into that space of being open to how it works for you, then you're going to get more of it, as opposed to getting confused, or maybe not even recognizing it because it hasn't shown up in a specific way that you wanted it to, or you thought it would, if that makes sense.
Yes. I remember doing your meditation on YouTube. It was very interesting because what you talked about is, well, first you would center in your heart, and then you talked about directing your energy down into the earth, and then all the way up into the different stars and things like that. And it was very interesting. I haven't really done that, like necessarily like focus my energy and try to connect with the earth like that. And it's very interesting what you intuitively, subtly sense, like how you talked about how things are just very subtle.
Yeah.
And you could easily miss that when you're not paying attention to like what you feel. You're more in your mind. You're focused on yourself. Like, because people say focus on yourself, but I think that's very vague. Like, I'll focus on yourself, but but really people are just saying focus on your ego in a sense. It's like, I think it's more important to really just like how you said, open up, and then kind of sense things out, feel things out. That entire experience you just described is you literally just opening yourself up, seeing where you're being led. You could kind of say like led by the spirit, or led by whatever,
the divine intelligence and all things.
Divine intelligence,
you know.
And like, I mean, I'm curious, but like, what were you trying to get out of like that whole? I mean, you said you didn't even have an intention, but was there really something you're trying to get out of it? Like maybe you're trying to get like an energetic upgrade, or
I was wanting to unlock further aspects within myself of my own divine template. So like, I mean, for the fact that I saw something that was a tree shaped like a key that had that triggered this vision, and then I sat down and did that whole thing. I mean, it couldn't have been any more obvious. Like, it was so funny. I was like, oh, this is kind of, because there's the cosmic joke that goes on the whole time too, right? The cosmic joke, which is just hilarious. It happens to me all the time, where I'm like almost being made fun of, like, and it's hilarious. So I'm like, oh, it's going to be that obvious, is it? Or I don't know. It's just, there's always a lot of comedy and humor when I'm working with the divine intelligence and I'm working with spirit, for me at least. And that's what makes it kind of funny, because I've always got a story out the other side of it. But, you know, the alignment that you're talking about, going down to the earth, going up through the suns, you know, that's really part of us energetically aligning, almost like on a universal, multiversal level. You know, did you feel an effect did you feel the effects when you did that within your body?
I felt energy, I felt like subtle energy, like touching my body. I wasn't as sensitive to what it was doing to me. I could just feel like, you know, sort of like just brushings like that. When I went to the earth, I felt a very strong, like that, like a solid core like that. And then when I went up to the, I think it was the sun, and you said like sun instead of a sun in the center of the universe.
There's this etheric second sun. There's the central sun, which is Alcyone in the Pleiades, or Alcyone. There's two pronunciations that kind of roll around. And then there's the great central sun. That kind of, which is an energy as opposed to a particular sun, as far as I understand. It's like a center of energy, you know, a vortex almost. That is bringing levels of alignment in the other subtle multidimensional layers of our being when we do that. That's why I use it. I was taught that way by a beautiful woman who's no longer on the planet. Solantra King actually taught me that in the original alignment. And you feel the energy flowing through. You feel your channels are more open. You feel grounded yet expanded. You know, it's kind of cool if you've never done it before. Often people comment on that. So yeah, it's about us intending to flow some energy, intending to do these things, you know. All of my multidimensional activations are guided with all sorts of sound, sacred geometry, you know, light, toning, certain sounds, all sorts of stuff comes through. It's really interesting. And even the other day I was channeling a message for someone, and a word came through, and I was like, what even is this? I don't even know what this is. So then I go and I try and Google it before the session. It's actually an ancient Sanskrit word. I don't know any Sanskrit. I don't know anything about that. But, you know, I'm like, and I'm spelling it as I'm channeling it to make sure I get it right. But then it turns out that and it was so relevant to her. And after I looked it up, what it meant, you know, it's always the way, you know, like when I was told to work with hyperdimensional geometry, I was like, does it even exist? When I go to Google again and I have to find what these things are, because they are not in my frame of reference. Like maybe they are in a parallel lifetime and I'm pulling in that I know what it is. But, you know, Joanna, the human self, does not know anything about hyperdimensional geometry or that it even exists or knows any Sanskrit, you know? So, but that's what happens when you allow yourself to just flow and you trust what you get, right? Because that builds more of that. As I said, it's this cumulative effect. So as you start moving into the space within yourself, more of it grows within you, and then you're able to access more of your own self and, you know, the inside outside reflection from this reality.
How do you stop yourself from contracting though? Because like when you start to open up yourself to these experiences, or maybe like a more extrasensory perceptions and things like that, like viewing outside of your physical five senses and seeing other things or seeing into other dimensions. I mean, I've had moments where it was just like scary, where I was just like, I knew I was seeing a spirit and I was starting to actually see it like in front of me. And I'm like, oh, nope. And then you just rather just be asleep. Like, it sounds like
which is fine. I mean, a lot of people are, and a lot of people like have to dial it down. You can ask for it to be turned up or turned down. You are in charge of your experience. You know, it's really coming back to that sovereignty, that moving out of this victim consciousness that's been plaguing the planet and separation, you know, forever. But moving back into the space of sovereignty is where we are moving now, and reclaiming that for ourselves, being in charge of our own experience, but from the deep level of the being, not the personality self, right? I'm not talking about just letting the personality self like run the show. That's not what I mean at all. It's about being really connected to that divine self, our true self, and allowing that to navigate things for us and us be on board with that, and being able to, you know, craft that experience and turn it down if it's too much and too intense and it's not appropriate at that time. And, you know, we can do that within ourselves. So you just got to get better at taking the lead within the self and sort of, you know, commanding your energy and being really clear. But there's a lot of fear that we have about these other realms, and it's, you know, I think depending on what you're bringing in is definitely down to our energetic signature, what we've got going on within us, and sometimes can also denote where the work needs to be done, right? Because we're having this full totality of experience based on our own energetics, based on what we got going on within us, and that could be moving a fear program out of yourself and the family line that goes back generations about stepping into spiritual gifts. It could be, you know, an emotional pattern that's been playing around since you were a kid that you need to move on from to allow us to move into expansion. But, you know, this is a live reality feed that is being, you know, informed by our radio signal that we're sending out, which is based on the totality of who we are, our thoughts, our emotions, our feelings and actions, you know, all of it combines into this signal, really. And then we're bringing in things that are causing us to shift or awaken a little bit more, or forcing us to trust. I mean, many, many things, right? It could just be the whole gamut here. But and that's what's the fluid process. And we're not going to be feeling good and on and in a connected place necessarily every day. That's a lot of pressure. We've got to be really fluid with this and allow ourselves to move through this and not, it be a certain way. You can be it's absolutely 100% in alignment to be dealing with really crunchy energy sometimes and having to go into an emotional purge. Like, I think last week or the week before, I got an intense migraine headache because of this really heavy X-class solar flare that went off. And I've now noticed that really, really migraine headaches that are not usual for me at all is actually like part and parcel with the solar weather that's happening. And so I had one client canceled, which always just happens. It works out. Like, a client canceled, I canceled another one, and it just said, no, I need to be in a space. And I sat and went into a really deep emotional purge of really old grief. I sat and read a book that many people had written about my dad. And I sat there, read it from cover to cover for 2 hours and sobbed and cried and purged and let all this emotion flow out of me in the state of vulnerability brought about by the solar flare and me able to just drop into what was needed in the moment rather than trying to force it to be something else or trying to make myself feel better. I just allowed it, right? It was uncomfortable, but it also moved through really quickly when I did that. So we're not supposed to be in our version of perfection all the time. It's meant to be ebbs and flows, contraction and expansion. You can't have one without the other, really. And so would there be anywhere to go if we were just in an expanded state the whole time? No, we'd be just on a flat line, right, of expansion. And then that would be the comfort zone. But like, you have to have the two to be in a space of evolution within yourself, I feel.
One of the things that I'm fascinated too is like, I mean, mind and heart coherence, brain and heart coherence. Like, when the mind and the heart combine together, it's like you can do it's interesting what you can be capable of. And what I mean by that, to kind of depict what I mean by that, is I've been in states where you could say spirit has come to me, or like it's like people view the material world as solid and they think that's just what it is. But when spirit comes to you, it's like everything starts to become lucid, and then things kind of feel a little bit wavy or like a little bit like you almost become like a little bit detached, and you're just like, whoa, like you're in this other state of being. And so you kind of observe things, everything becomes fluid and everything becomes lucid. So when I say brain and heart coherence, that's the mind or the spirit revealing itself to you and how everything is possible. And then when the heart comes in, is the heart pulls in and sucks in that energy. And then with your belief and with your faith and things like that, you can do things that people, that's what a mystic does, is really just harness that energy and then, does certain things. I mean, so can you go into a little bit of your research with the Heart Math Institute on maybe brain and heart coherence, or like just anything that comes to your mind when it comes to, brain and heart coherence and things like that? Like, what is that?
I mean, it's been really fascinating because for me, that I was given information about the heart and almost taken on a vision quest over a period of a couple of years, shown the way. But it was really cool because the Heart Math, actually, with their independent research of over 30 years, they basically back up why I got all of this information about it. It gives it like the proof or whatever, which is so interesting, right? For me, I was like, this is so cool, because you don't necessarily expect that. And a lot of the time you don't have any proof, and proof is just wanted by the logical mind anyway. We don't actually need it. But that's a part of us letting go of these kind of finite structures of reality and conditioning and programming that we have been trained into over the course of our life, right? So we're undoing all of that in this process to get back to that true light that we are and that true nature. And, the heart is so interesting because when you are in connection to that space, I mean, the research from the Heart Math shows that the brain sends signals to the heart, but the heart sends more signals to the brain than the brain sends to the heart, which we've always been taught, like the brain's the mainframe since we were like young and at school, right? But that's not what's happening at all. The brain is taking orders from the heart and more orders, like fact, right? So And it's not about us being like, oh, the terrible mind. It's not about that at all, because the mind is an amazing technology too. It is such a cool part of our toolkit, and we wouldn't be able to have this experience of reality without it. But it's about bringing it into balance, and not, we've been conditioned into just utilizing this and focusing on this, rather than it being in balance and it being informed by the intelligence of the heart and then going for it. There's just these differences in the way that the balance within us operates, so that allows us to open up. And they've also done a lot of research about when you are in more heart coherence, that sends a signal into your whole entire body and being of homeostasis. So it's sending a signal of harmonizing our field when we are getting into coherence more often, because we are changing our emotional landscape by creating heart-brain coherence. And we're bringing the dominant energy of the mind into the space of the heart. And then we're able to perceive from this space rather than this more easily and more often. And also cumulative effect, it builds. The more you do it, the more you're almost automatically in it more often. So it doesn't become as much of a like, oh, I've got to do my heart coherence. It's a bit of a chore. It becomes just a natural part of our being, because we're just retraining, realigning the balance so that we are able to have tapped into this information from a more expanded part of our field that is totally like the purpose of being here, So it can be really, really beneficial for those kinds of things, the emotional, the physiological balancing and getting more of that information happens when we are tapped in and when we're in alignment. So it just provides a foundational, balance and harmonization point for us to be able to be the best of our ability to receive the intuitive guidance. It's sort of like the baseline level that you kind of need if you want to play around in this area, really. But not just about that equally either, so many more multidimensional facets to it that I'm sure we will eventually start to understand more of, but we don't know right now. And, the Institute of HeartMath also did the research that showed that the heart has an intuitive capability that knows between 3 and 5 seconds of the impact of something. It's responding to the impact of something before we have even registered it with our physical eyes or our physical senses, right? It is 3 to 5 seconds beforehand. And if it's something that may be, contracting to our emotions or challenging, then we're going to get more of a heads up on it, right? It's just the way it works. If something is coming in that's going to be like in a, like, I don't want to say bad or negative, but in that space that is like going to cause an emotional reaction in us that is going to be contracting in some way, then we're going to know about it sooner than it is if it's a positive one. But we know ahead of time either way before we even have the stimulus in our environment. And I mean, how fascinating is that? Basically, it just proves intuition, like, right?
Yeah.
And that the intuition isn't coming. I mean, I think a lot of people think it's coming from the third eye, but it's not. This is a significant part of the technology that is us working with our deeper levels of intuition. And it also works with the third eye and all of these other things, right? We're just not, it's not down to necessarily one or the other, but the heart being the center of our being is, a huge foundational tool for us.
Yeah, and also an example of that too, like knowing something 3 to 5 seconds ahead of time. Like I've heard about that study. Like the other day, it was just yesterday. I remember just talking to somebody, and then at least the way that my heart communicated to me was like, I had an imagination of somebody that I knew, and so I was talking to them. I hadn't got their name yet, and as I was talking to them, I got an imagination of like a friend that I knew, and then I was like, why did I get that for some reason? I was thinking that while I was talking, I'm like, why did I just think of so and so? And then I asked for the person's name, and then it was the name of my friend. My friend's name was, I'm not gonna say his name, but his name was like Joe. I'll say Joe. And then when I asked for the guy's name, he was like, oh, my name's Joe. And I was like, oh shit, like my heart was communicating to me through like imagination or like a memory from the past, and it's kind of like telling me their name beforehand. But I mean, that is kind of risky though, to just be out, oh, is your name so and so? That's kind of risky. But I mean, but the heart does know like that, and you can kind of be 2 steps ahead, people like that.
I mean, we know more than we think we know. And we have access
Exactly.
to more than we think we have access to. And like the most of the limitation is coming from within our own self and our belief systems and narratives and the stories we tell, everyone else and ourselves about who and what we really are. And, we are moving into a new paradigm of all of this stuff. And we're leaving an old paradigm behind, including an old spiritual paradigm, an old energetic paradigm. We're really moving into a new space. And I feel we are all here to open that up by tapping into the space within ourselves that isn't known. It is absolutely 100% the unknown. But you've got to follow the energy to get there. You've got to really listen to the subtle layers of your being to allow what wants to come through to you to come through and be recognized and then followed so that you get to the next energy, like I was doing in the forest in the weekend,
Mhm.
So it's, but then when we are all tapping into that level of our own unique technology and why we're here, that's the whole point, in my opinion, because we are creating a new paradigm. We're creating a new world, essentially, a new level of humanity, and we're returning to the divine human. We're the only ones in kind of westernized culture that don't have any heritage or remembrance in this stuff, and we've started to term it as things like woo-woo and all that. It's absolute rubbish. This is not what it is at all. It's fundamental basics of us in this reality with the divine intelligence that, a lot of beautiful indigenous cultures still have memory of and respect and bring that knowledge through. But we're the only ones that are like, oh no, that's all woo-woo or whatever, because it doesn't fit within the current construct of this reality and science and education and politics and all the rest of it. I mean, it's actually comical if you think about it.
Yeah, it's because we think more with our logical mind, and we haven't really tapped into like what's in here, so
Yeah.
we call it woo-woo because
And based on
we
the
try to put it in
rules,
logic. Yeah.
the rules that have been given to us by someone else that's gone before that are totally kind of irrelevant right now. And they've been based in a level of consciousness that isn't where we're at now anyway, I mean, it's just hilarious. I just think it's so funny, but it's the indoctrination of this reality. And as far as I know, we need to be undoctrinating ourselves out of all of it. Absolutely all of it. I don't care who said it or where it came from, back to the point in the dream, the ancient meditation technique. Like if it's 10,000 years old, maybe it's not for now, It's like we've got to be prepared to actually, change the game of this reality. And we're not going to get there, I don't feel, by pulling on all of this other stuff that's gone before. Because this reality this time on the planet is calling for us to step in a whole new way, step in a whole new level of our energy and really show up in the capability of our light and all of the technology and information and wisdom we brought with us from everywhere, right? Multiple parallel, like we are just holding so much, and it's been in a state of suppression and it's coming into expansion right now, which is what's really exciting. Because I mean, even just the solar flares, like we didn't have any M-class solar flares in the whole year of 2018. So last week we had 10 in a day. That
Crazy.
is the difference, right? And the space, everything is energy. It's firing light to the planet. It's pressurizing. I mean, a supernova just went off like a couple of days ago. That's like, I think 21,000 light years away. That's starting to reach us in the next few days, like we are being impacted. Like everything is connected. Everything is part of the whole. And it's not just like, oh, that happened out in space. Like there's an energetic reference point for us, each and every one of us, right? So if we're really not cottoning on to that and understanding that there's so much happening and that is pushing for change and pressurizing the diamond within, then, that's really, as far as I understand it, what's going on here.
Exactly. Yeah, because the heart is like in touch with everything. Like it feels the universe, and so when things are happening, you're feeling it as if it was yourself. And so it's very interesting when you start opening up like that. You start to notice those little things like that.
They don't scientifically really know how far our energy goes. They don't. And as far as I know, I mean, it's limitless in that, it's not just like the toroidal field of the heart. It's not that at all, which is, 5 to 8 meters wide around us, or I don't know what that is in feet, but there's so much that we don't know. So stop trying to go to the information that we don't know and just trust in what is coming through, because that's going to be way more profound and way more important than anything gone before. And I just think that there's so much of this reality that's misunderstood and is also in a way inadvertently suppressing what's really the truth here, and where we're all being encouraged to go in the subtle levels of our being that's playing out all the time if we're just willing, ready, and open to listen.
All right. So my final question for you is, what's the most profound intuitive insight that the heart has given you so far? Like, what's something that people don't necessarily talk about, but maybe you've been like holding it close to your chest and you're like, I don't know, should I say this? And then
Well, I'll tell you one thing that came through the other day. And I think, how was it termed? It was termed something really interesting. I don't know if I can even find the exact words that it came through as the day, but basically it was, we can't come into vibrational match with solutions for climate change if we're sitting in fear or victim consciousness or believe that the world is ending. The vibrational match, like when we are in our perspective, carrying a vibration in the way that we perceive this reality, and I'm not just talking about on the level of climate change or about what is this, like actually is like a thread that is actually true across all of it. It's the same as like if your perspective is like the planet is dying or all of these creatures are becoming extinct and that's all terrible, like that's a certain narrative that's driving things. And we can't come into vibrational match with solutions when we're in this space of judgment, fear, separation and consciousness, all of these kinds of things. Because we can't meet, we're only going to be in that level to meet those kinds of information and understanding. So we have to be able to increase our perspective and expand up to understand that everything in this, multiverse is orchestrated through the divine intelligence and perfectly. I mean, nature is never not perfect, right? It's just not. We see it out there. It's telling us that this is what's happening. It's all in divine perfection, the destruction and the creation and all of it, the birth and the death, right? But we as humans come from this sort of quite judgmental position on all of it because we think things should be a different way. But meanwhile, they are meant to be that way. But so when we can open and expand and understand that, maybe this species actually died out because they had done their work on the planet. They'd done the holding of the energy and they were actually moving on to the next thing. And they're not disappeared. They're just disappeared from one plane of existence because they're in a different dimensional resonance. If you can open up to these kinds of understandings, then you really can start to come into vibrational alignment with the kinds of information that's wanting to come through to us, rather than cycling in this, story of humanity on this planet, which is that, essentially like we're these terrible humans that have done all this stuff and screwed up the planet. Well, I think that is absolute bullshit. I don't subscribe. So unsubscribe, right? But it's really important down to your experience and also for the collective, right? Because we're not going to be able to shift some of these challenges that we've got going on and the way that this reality is run and how we've put things in place. We're not going to be able to move into these really incredible expansions and allow all the technology that's already there that it hasn't really come to the forefront or has been kept away for so long to come into the forefront, right? We all need to start shifting our perspective, shifting to come into the vibrational match with more expanded solutions that are going to benefit all of us. But the part of where we're at is due to, that collective consciousness and us all contributing in our own way to that. So we've got to be mindful about what that looks like, what the experience is, and realize what it is allowing us or disallowing us in the terms of where we're at in this reality and how we all want to move forward.
Yep, exactly. Yeah. And when we're in that fearful state, obviously we start to resort to restrictions and starting
Totally.
to limit
But that's what I
things.
mean.
And
All the solutions are at that at that vibrational level. You know, I think that was the whole point of Einstein saying um, you can't find a solution at the level the problem was created, or those
yeah,
aren't
like
the
that.
exact words, but you know what I mean. It's
Yeah.
it's that thing, but we are so conditioned into it, and we're just never going to understand that that is actually limiting us, and we are contributing to our own contraction by continuing some of these kind of classic scenarios, whether it's like, oh, you have to be all puritanical and spiritual and be vegan to be this and whatever else, but there's all these different philosophies that are kind of loaded with the frequencies of judgment and fear and separation consciousness and all of this stuff that's operating at the subtle level. And people think that they're genuinely doing, their best and the right thing, when actually energetically it's not so much. It's actually a level of contraction. It's a level of taking us out of the heart. It's like it's really kind of funny, because it's the subtle ways that this goes about when the intention is sort of there, but energetically the nuances aren't understood in a way for us to be able to really be really sovereign, and also have that responsibility within the self of who and what we truly are, and how powerful that is on this planet right now. It's so, I mean, I love this kind of conversation and debate around this kind of stuff, because it is just us in our unconsciousness that allows us not to be able to perceive any of this. And when we can bring ourselves out, especially into the places that we're resistant of, or that we're in avoidance or blame or judgment or any of that, then we're gonna start cracking into what needs to be freed up for us to really liberate ourselves and liberate this planet into a really beautiful, loving place to be.
I like that. And then where can people find you?
Oh, you can find me at my website at joannawalden.com. And on social media, on Instagram and Facebook, I am Joanna Walden. So yeah, all of those places you can find me. You can find The Inside Hustle on Amazon or Audible. It's all around the place, and it's a really interesting frequency journey that can take you on if you're open to it. So highly encourage it to be read in that way. And this has been really fun. Thank you so much for having me. I've had a blast.
Thank you for coming on. Love the information. It's all valuable stuff. I think whoever watches this is going to take away, and they're going to start dropping it to their heart. So
that's what I would love.
All right. Thank you, Joanna.
Okay. Thanks so much.